Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I actually hope I'm going live about now because my OBS was giving me trouble again. No idea why. Maybe it's the macOS beta. Maybe it's just the latest OBS version. Maybe it's just being unlucky getting back home and resetting up all my traditional setups. So I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. I hope everything is going smoothly. I hope I don't have to create a new stream. Let me briefly go actually to my live channel. Yep, it seems to work. Thank God. So I'll leave it be for now. Let's see how that ultimately plays out. Now, of course, we're coming in hot from all the M4 announcements, M4, M4 Pro, M4 Max, the Mac Mini, the iMac, and of course the MacBook Pro. We've been covering it daily for 5 days, from Monday to Friday. Took yesterday off, had to get back to my usual home. This is the setup there is. I already see Angelica, one of our long-term MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube, a channel member and everything else, is already in the chat, wishing us all hi and a nice live stream. Shout out to Max Maximus and Steve, who are also MarkTech Pro Max channel members right here on YouTube. Shout out to all the other ways in which you can support this channel, watching the videos, subscribing to the channel, liking the content, sharing it out, of course, commenting. You have seen throughout the week how much I love interacting with a lively live chat, getting your opinions, getting your questions, agreements, disagreements, right? Was very lively, exchanging thoughts over time as we have more people regularly on the stream, because obviously I don't expect getting to the 180 viewers that we had on Tuesday. I might integrate the live chat actually into the video. Maybe let me know what you would think of that. And yes, this is the channel that you are going to expect here. This is me reacting to the latest Apple news, rumors, reviews. Sometimes I do my own stuff whenever I have the latest hardware. However, I do not plan on getting any new hardware probably until the iPhone 17 Pro Max. So that's about where we are. And this is about where we'll be. Of course, I'll keep covering in the next week when we're getting reviews and hands-on impressions. And I know for my nerdy community and my nerdy heart, very importantly, benchmarks for the M4 Max, seeing differences, seeing potentially some bottlenecks, some thermal throttling if there is. There might be drama or anything else like that. I would love to see that covered. And of course, I would love to see you join and discuss it with me. Now, for today, we actually do have a lot of news and rumors, but well, mostly rumors, but some of it has been rumored for so long and by so many different sources, and it just makes so much sense that at that point, I'm kind of inclined to use the confirmed word, even though I know, of course, it's cursed. So much stuff has felt confirmed. Do I need to remind you of like the squared off Apple Watch redesign and what happened, or to be more precise, what didn't happen with that? And of course, everything else in between. We've had rumors that changed over time. We've had rumors that were ultimately delayed, but then ultimately turned out true. So there is a lot here that is similarly far-reaching. For example, we are going to talk about Macs in 2026, which also, of course, means briefly covering Macs coming in 2025. So looking forward to the next 2 generations, even before the M4 Max have officially come out, right? They have been announced, but no reviews yet. They have not hit the hands of consumers yet. So I understand talking about any of that is a little early. You can let me know if it's way, way too early. But I do think it is an interesting discussion, even for people like me, because as I've said multiple times, I myself own an M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro. Right now, even though I, of course, acknowledge how great the M3 and the M4 generations have been, to me, there is no reason to upgrade. And even on Twitter recently, I actually posted a list that said, look, I would want and actually need these kinds of changes before I upgrade my MacBook. But it's not just that, like, let's say the M2 generation already offered all that stuff. I wouldn't have upgraded. if it had already like Tandem OLED and a 3 times faster processor or something like that. That's all cool and that's a great goal to have, but ultimately I still believe in maximizing the usage and the ownership of your specific product, right? I do not believe that if you're happy with your product, and unless you have a really good way to either resell your phone or Mac or whatever at a decent price, or you have family members that might be in need of a new product, right? I don't believe in super quick upgrades. Every time I've been able to do a very quick upgrade has usually resulted in my old device going to a friend or family member who I knew would take good care of it, who I knew actually needed it, and that if they needed let's say tips, they would go to me. I would be acquainted with the device. That would, of course, help me. Anybody who I have in my family tech group, right? That helps me, of course, a lot if everybody there is an iPhone or an Apple user in general. So that is why I was able to quickly upgrade in the era when not everyone even had a smartphone. Now with laptops, there is a question, well, who would even like really benefit from my M1 Max MacBook Pro? So many people I know have like work laptops and stuff like that. So just ultra quickly like upgrading on the Mac doesn't make sense to me, and I know it doesn't make sense to most of you. This is why the Mac upgrade cycle is like 2 to 3 times as long as the average upgrade cycle is for the iPhone. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we aren't getting new Macs, and I also don't believe that it means Apple should be lengthening the gaps between new Mac models, because as Rene Ritchie always said, which in my opinion is one of the greatest metaphors in the tech space, and that is, he said that tech should be a lot like bread, right? Even though you go pretty much every morning to buy a new piece of bread, right? You expect that piece of bread to be fresh. This is why the baker bakes that bread every day or every other day or whatever, right? The baker cannot say, oh, some people come in only 4 or 5 days, right? Maybe I should only bake bread every 4th or 5th day. No. You should be ready that some people want bread today, and while you shouldn't be expected to bake that bread 5 minutes before they come in, you should definitely be expected to make bread at least once a day, or at least once every 2 days. And for tech, that usually results in a 12 to 24 month gap. Some tech can benefit more from a 12-month gap, some from like an 18 or 24-month gap. You could argue some accessories can even live with like a 3-month gap, especially if that means their pricing comes down, right? A little bit more of the console business model. But in general, like if you're buying a new phone and that phone is like a year and 9 months old, right? You would expect that phone to either be like heavily discounted because there's a new model. You would expect that phone to be available as refurbished or even like heavily used, right? But if you are a high-end customer who at that point also wants a new phone, then at kind of the worst case, you would want that phone to be 9 months old. And you would want even to have the freedom to say, look, if I wait another 3 months, I'm getting the even more latest phone, right? So, and with laptops, while I don't think the gap needs to be 12 months, I definitely like it when Apple is in a close to annual schedule, which actually seems to be now proving out that Apple Silicon can enable that. When originally like M2 Max came out, like let's say a lot later, even though like 18 months is not that a lot after M1, a lot of people started to think, oh, maybe Macs are going like the 18 to 24 month route. But then M3 came out relatively quickly, especially if we compare like M3 Pro and M3 Max to M2 Pro and M2 Max. And of course, if you then compare now M4 Pro, the entire M4 family versus the entire M3 family, that's also very, very quick rollout, even quicker if you try to account for the iPad, which might not be a Mac, but I mean, it did get that chip even before the Macs. And for many people, it is just an Apple productivity productivity device. You can argue whether or not Macs and iPads should be counted together. I personally don't care. I think there's enough overlap there. I also think there are enough differences there. So yeah, this is why I know that was a long preamble, a long ramble even to a degree, but this is why I do cover rumors that are further away, but I'm also careful about that. I do cover mostly people that are somewhat known, somewhat reputable. The usual three subjects would be like Mark Gurman, of course, even though he has a mixed track record with very far off predictions. Ming-Chi Kuo, who unfortunately, now that he is sort of independent, also hasn't had the greatest track record with long-term predictions, but some of his history like makes me somewhat more apologetic towards him. And the other player would be Ross Young, especially when we are talking about stuff like displays, because he is a display supply chain analyst. He has leaked in the past stuff like mini LED screens, Apple's ProMotion rollouts and stuff like that. The fact that Apple would be using what materials for the OLED panels, right? Like the fact that the iPhone 16 Pros, for example, use Samsung's M14 materials, which I believe has been proven out. I mean, he still maintains that even after the iPhone launch, so I assume he was proven correct. And he had for a time even like a perfect 100% track record, but that's also because he had a very short amount of predictions that he was making. So this is what you should be expecting today, a range of rumors, trying to put them into context with everything that has happened last week. But before all of that, there is actually a small piece of news, but I think for some people in the community, it will actually be quite notable. And that is the fact that Apple did acquire Pixelmator, which is a fantastic developer. They make Pixelmator Photo and they make just Pixelmator and Pixelmator Pro, I guess. I personally use Pixelmator on my iPhone and iPad to do all my thumbnails for this channel. Even a basic thumbnail like today with the text and stuff like that. Just over a MacBook. And their apps have always felt very Apple-y. Now, I have had some issues with their apps, primarily related to stability. However, I usually do not complain too much because I am a beta user most of the time. So to me, it's honestly unfair if I complain because sometimes I just cannot tell you if the problems come from my usage of the latest iOS beta or if it's an actual problem with the app. Now, I strongly suspect it's more of an issue with the actual app because, well, everything else was stable and the app was clearly made worse by one specific update. So I had some stability issues like a few months ago or something like that. But beyond that, their app is fast. It's well optimized. It usually gets like the full suite of updates in regards to a new Apple like software release. So it adopts the latest APIs and frameworks. It works remarkably well across a whole range of hardware. It of course syncs over iCloud. So it does all the Apple jazz. And in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense for Apple to buy them. They even featured them once during a keynote, showed off some capabilities that their apps used. And now that Apple is working a lot more with photos again, like previously they had, of course, their professional photo editing app, which was Aperture, but they didn't really update it enough. It was really left in the dust by stuff like Photoshop over time and even Lightroom. So Apple kind of killed it and then officially killed it. So in my opinion, now that because of their push into Apple Intelligence and AI, image generation, all that stuff, in my opinion, it makes sense to get these kinds of professionals, also people, in my opinion, with a strong vision when it comes to user interface design and things like that. So supposedly this is a pretty notable acquisition of over like $114 million because it was registered by like the entity in the United States that actually requires purchases of that size or higher to be registered. And and the team has confirmed it. So this is not a leak or rumor in any way. This is an official piece of news. I personally wouldn't expect anything to change until like WWDC. And then I would expect like some of the early seeds of that acquisition to actually bear some fruit. And to be quite honest, I would expect this to be more of a 2-year integration, because right now, if Apple still doesn't want to entirely kill the applications, which they have confirmed, by the way, that the apps of the Pixelmator guys are staying as is right now, and they are getting updates. So in my opinion, if the developers still have to work on those older apps, I don't necessarily expect Apple to launch like a huge Photos redesign anytime soon, integrating all those features. If anything, I would kind of expect them to say, look, Pixelmator Pro, Pixelmator Photo is kind of like a revival of Aperture. We are allowing the Pixelmator guys some freedom to upkeep that app, but at the same time, we are also integrating some of them to work on Apple Intelligence, on the Photos app, on Final Cut. Yeah, that's what I would expect to happen. But in any way, I do believe this is good news. I'm usually against like industry consolidation, and I know some people have brought up like how Apple treated Dark Sky. To be quite honest, I don't care about separate weather apps. Like, and especially in Europe, I have never gotten like that super special treatment of like, this is your exact weather in 44 minutes or something like that. While it's cool, and I envy the people who have gotten some of those services, especially in the United States, I personally never cared for Dark Sky, and everything that I've heard from people who are more neutral is basically, oh, Apple didn't do as much with Dark Sky as they hoped they would. I know some people are very angry with how Apple did it. It's honestly like a drop in the bucket. Like, usually when I refer to Apple's like acquisitions, we're talking more about things like Beats by Dre, and how Apple, of course, made Apple Music out of the Beats Music app, how they allowed that company still independence to keep making their own hardware, but how they also integrated some of those audio engineers to keep working on the next generation of AirPods, HomePods, stuff like that, how they just gradually kept building out their audio expertise in general with all those acoustic chambers and stuff like that. So when it comes to bigger acquisitions, Apple definitely is one of the best companies out there, and part of that comes from them not making those big acquisitions all too often. Like, we're not talking about like Microsoft acquiring LinkedIn or Skype and stuff like that. We're not talking about anti-competitive moves like Facebook acquiring WhatsApp and stuff like that. So while I am against industry consolidation, this is not a case of industry consolidation. This to me is two parts that in a way have always belonged together, finding each other. And while the Pixelmator guys are great, and I do trust them a lot, I definitely do like them being now backed by Apple's almost infinite resources in comparison to what they had before. And even if it might not mean the best thing for like the current state of the Pixelmator Pro and Pixelmator Photos app, I'm still inclined to believe that in the long sense, it will be very good for similar stuff like inside the Apple Photos app, or maybe they create a separate version that integrates all that stuff. Maybe they put it behind a subscription. Maybe they give it a lifetime payment option. I know some people are afraid that there won't be lifetime payment options anymore. So while there is some pros, some cons, the pros definitely are winning out for me. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I'm delusional and an Apple sheep and I just want to push a pro-Apple agenda or anything like that. But I really did want to cover this because, in my opinion, as a very, very regular Pixelmator user, I hope this does result in something good. And for now, I do have every reason to believe that it will actually turn out good. Now, one thing that might be a little bit more controversial, and in my opinion, of course, also way more important for the entire Apple community, is what could be happening with the MacBook Pro. Now, of course, if we go to apple.com, which we have done a lot over the last week, sorry, you will see that where are those? We see the Mac Mini here. We see the iMac. Where's the MacBook Pro? Did they not? Did I scroll over? Oh, and the MacBook Pro, by the way, I know like how the Apple community, like the more nerdy guys like us, we really, really hype the Mac Mini, but you know which one is more important if the MacBook Pro is sitting here alongside the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro. Meanwhile, the Mac Mini is relegated kind of like, oh, you're basically as important as the iMac, maybe a little bit above that. And Apple Intelligence, they are gradually rolling it out. Apple Intelligence will stay on this website for basically years to come. So even while it's a little lower here, it will be like refreshed once iOS 18.2 comes out. And then, of course, 18.4. Apple will hype it up again once it's available in new English-speaking regions. And then once it rolls out across Europe and gets support for like German and French and Spanish, right? So yeah, expect some form of Apple Intelligence shout out on Apple's like website for years and years to come. When it comes to the Macs, of course, we just got the M4 and M4 Pro Mac Mini, the biggest redesign here, extra ports, very, very small, still like a fantastic $599 starting price. The iMac, which again, I can down talk it a lot for its like $1299 starting price, but it does come with a 4.5K display. It, of course, comes with Magic Mouse and keyboard by default, which you would have to buy for the Mac Mini. It does give you also like fun options like Ethernet built into the power brick. So however you want to see it, I still don't think the iMac is terrible value. I just think if you can really integrate a Mac Mini with like an external screen, have the option to sometimes you upgrade the screen, sometimes you upgrade the Mac, right? Well, with the iMac, of course, some of that freedom is taken away from you. So I do believe the Mac Mini is superior. But yes, if we are looking at the grander picture, the MacBook Pro with its portability, like it's just like much, much more key to Apple's Mac success than any desktop Mac right now. And it even shows with the fact that Apple upgraded the MacBook Pro with M4, M4 Pro, M4 Max. Meanwhile, in the desktop space, the best chip you can get is the M2 Ultra in the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro. So, well, actually, I would argue that the M4 Pro is still the best actually chip that you can get in a desktop Mac, but it's definitely not the biggest or most ambitious ones. But yeah, if Apple thought that desktops were like the key to their success, you bet their ass they would have upgraded at least the Mac Studio with the M4 Max, or even more, they would have just fully gone Ultra and given you the M4 Ultra, put it into a Mac Studio, put it into a Mac Pro. But alas, you see, portability definitely wins out. Even with the Mac Mini, you could argue that portability sort of wins out because the smaller, more portable Mac in that desktop Mac was upgraded before the bigger, clunkier desktop Macs. Onion Peeler saying, I'm skipping this release of the M4 because it lacks the OLED screens. Was very disappointed. My question is, why would you expect it to have Tandem OLED? Because for one, Apple is not integrating regular OLED in the MacBook Pro. I will argue about some nuance there, but when we are talking especially about the M Pro and M Max versions, I would usually expect those to only get upgraded with Tandem OLED. We have seen with the iPad that Apple really, really values like high brightness, high longevity, high efficiency. And unfortunately, you do lose out on a lot of that stuff if you're currently going with the available OLED technologies. Like even the best Samsung 120 hertz like laptop panels, they max out at like 400 nits of full screen brightness, at best 500, and even then they usually lose some like accuracy and color performance. At that brightness level, they become very, very inefficient in a way. So while those screens are good, don't forget, Apple did not entirely rest on their laurels with this MacBook Pro when it comes to the screen. And I honestly, as a M1 Max MacBook Pro user with a mini LED screen for the last 3 years, can promise you that mini LED for now is arguably a better technology. Now, of course, would Tandem OLED be better? Yeah, sure. But it's not like Apple just gave us the same old spec here. Looking at the screen, you get now 1,000 nits of sustained full brightness now for SDR content as well. That was previously limited to 600 nits. You get the HDR capabilities that no laptop OLED screen will be able to replicate. You will have no fear of burn-in. And the efficiency is quite good, especially at high brightness in comparison. But yes, an OLED screen would be thinner, would have perfect pixel-to-pixel brightness, and would have faster pixel response times. So I do understand there are some advantages to OLED, even if it's not tandem OLED, but you would be losing out on some great things that really, really have defined Apple's mini LED panels for the last couple of years. Tipper Master saying, yeah, M6 plus tandem OLED is going to be about my perfect MacBook Pro. Well, you'll spend a lot of money on it. Kind of feel the same, brother. It's still a while away. Yeah, I think when we're talking about 2026, there's also the question, will it be a late 2026 product? Could Apple potentially speed it along and put it somehow into the middle of 2026? I will give some speculation on how I think that could still be possible, even though I personally think that a late 2026 release is still more likely. Plus, of course, the redesign and all the stuff that is now already built in, right? Like Thunderbolt 5, which if we just looked at the previous generation, let's even say the current generation, because technically the M4 Max have not yet hit the hands of consumers, right? That's already an update. Of course, by that point, it will have Wi-Fi 7. We have even covered rumors how the next Apple made, how Apple's first Apple modems will like integrate Wi-Fi 7. Eventually, they will even integrate like the fastest Wi-Fi 7 with support for 320 megahertz bandwidth. So there is just a lot that will accumulate. Even stuff like, for now, like who expected these Macs to get like center stage cameras, right? And the efficiency gains, of course, a 2-nanometer chip sounds cool. I personally would wait for a 2-nanometer chip just out of principle to get a full 2-node jump. Of course, even better would be like get like something like A16, which would be like also incorporating backplane power delivery, which in my opinion is probably going to be a larger gap versus 2-nanometer than 2-nanometer at that point will be versus N3P. So yeah, to me, there's plenty of reason to wait, but at the same time, I still know that most people are not maximizing the usage of their current MacBook Pros, and even if they got like the best MacBook Pro right now, they would still not be maximizing it. That many of the people who are saying, oh, I want an OLED MacBook, like I still have to ask you, like, what exactly will you be leveraging? Will you be gaming on the Mac so that you need the fastest response time, right? Most likely not. What OLED screen can you get outside of tandem OLED that at this size would give you these brightness levels? You cannot, right? If you're using your MacBook Pro even for stuff like coding, I guess you can benefit from not having blooming artifacts, right? But at the same time, you also might be more susceptible to burn-in issues. So there's so much to consider, that whenever people just say, "Oh, I want OLED because OLED by default is better than like LCD or even like a very advanced mini LED panel," I really have to remind those people it depends on your workflow. In fact, arguably mini LED and at some point micro LED, which would be the truly superior technology because it will have all the advantages of OLED while further pushing efficiency and brightness without the risk of burn-in. So my question is like, how much do you really need OLED and why, especially in a Mac, right? If you were telling me, oh, I'm an Apex Legends player and I want a Windows laptop with the fastest response time, I don't even need like the fastest graphics or the longest battery life. I can make compromises to achieve that. I would be like, go for it, brother. Like macOS doesn't even have that great of a future in gaming anytime soon, even though I am optimistic in the long term. Even if you could play some of your games through crossover, you never are guaranteed that maybe some in-game update or some like security feature or anti-cheat feature of the game will not block you. Go for it. Buy yourself a Windows laptop, spec it out nicely, give yourself a fast screen, give yourself like a lot of storage for a lot less money than buying an Apple device. But don't try to act as somehow that specific like piece of hardware like ultimately made your decision. No, it's how you would use that piece of hardware that made your decision. Similar to me, I actually prefer the color signs on standard LED panels, but I do like the contrast and OLED more. So while to me, like OLED is technically best and the tandem OLED that gives you a lot of brightness is fantastic, mini LED gives me most of the benefits that I would need. Like sure, I would like a screen with faster response times, but it doesn't kill me on my Mac given the workflows that I have on it. And for gaming, I do have my OLED TV. So I know that I'm in a privileged situation here where I have multiple devices across multiple categories and stuff like that. But I'm trying to tell people I would still be perfectly happy even with my iPad if my iPad could also stream and had like a faster chip option so I could play around with like emulators and stuff like that. So technically I would need like an iPad Ultra, right? But that device doesn't exist, so I have an iPad Pro. Didn't even configure it with the maximum storage or RAM because at that point I knew I would also get like a MacBook. Yeah, so there's so much things to consider. I just don't like when people try to like focus on one piece of hardware. A Tipper Master, what else? Also, it's nicer and I can pay for it. It's an average Mercedes driver really maxing it out. True. Well, I would argue you would be surprised how low spec some Mercedes do get, even at like 70 or 80K here in Germany. But yeah, I fully understand what you mean. Like, but there are also like comfort stuff, right? And brand stuff. Like a lot of people buying Mercedes could buy a cheaper, like let's even say another German brand like a Volkswagen, right? Many people buying a MacBook, you're buying it because it's also a MacBook. So while yes, you would want a piece of hardware specifically to like cater to your, oh, it's nice but I can pay for it, at the same time, is it really a deal breaker to you? Have you really even experienced that maxed out hardware that you're envisioning? Similar to how like, oh, I cannot get like a V8 engine in like my Mercedes of choice. Damn, that means it's useless. Well, were you ever gonna really do too much with it, even on the Autobahn here? So yeah, that's what I'm saying. But let's actually, we've talked actually a lot about the rumor now without talking about the rumor. And that is, this is coming from Mark Gurman. You can also go to his Power On newsletter here from Bloomberg. It's nicely summarized here by 9 to 5 Mac. Also, like sometimes I do not get the full report somehow. I don't know if part of it is behind a paywall or I'm just too stupid, but I like Command F inside it and looked for like MacBook Pro and stuff like that. So I guess I'm very, very happy about the summaries and that some people are better at using the Bloomberg website. I'm not stupid. I'm just very, very hurt at this point by the Bloomberg website. It has been really, really unstable for me for some reason on my Macs, on my iPads, even if I use like the Chrome browser for it. So I look at it, I see, oh, it's there, and then I go to the summary. So thank you here to Michael Burkhardt from 9 to 5 Mac summarizing this. This is, of course, as I said, coming from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, and it's about a total redesign for the MacBook Pro. Now, I know a lot of you will be worried when you hear total redesign, because total redesign will remind you of like butterfly keys and all the issues that came with that, the removal of all ports except for USB-C. Now, I don't think Apple is going that route, but we did have rumors that Apple is going thinner. So I could even see them making like the keyboard keys maybe making thinner, and I don't know, maybe one of the ports could go away or be redesigned. I could see over time maybe the SD card slot going away, because I'm still questioning how many people are actually using the SD card. Especially these days. Like, I fully understand why the SD card mattered a lot a couple of years ago. These days, though, a lot of good cameras, at that point, probably any camera in the years to come, right, does have like USB output. So you just connect it via cable. It transfers data to your Mac, no matter what kind of storage it uses, whether it's SD card slots or one of the superior faster solutions. Even if you're working like with like, of course, an external SSD, like for super high-end solution like red cameras and stuff like that. I don't know, but HDMI is cool. I guess at some point we would need like a newer version of HDMI, like HDMI 2.2 or 3.0, something that gives you like 8K 120 hertz or something like that. Of course, we now do have Thunderbolt 5 maxing out at 120 gigabits per second. We do have inside Thunderbolt 5 support for DisplayPort 2.1. So there is a lot that Apple is doing here with all the different ports. Of course, there's MagSafe, which is great. I repeatedly kind of like stumble over my MacBook charging cable, and then I just hear that satisfying bloop of MagSafe leaving my Mac. That being said, I could also see that going away at some point again, depending on which designers are in charge. Now, granted, given that I believe that John Turnus maybe at that point will be in charge, depending on how early Tim wants to leave the company. Damn, I cannot talk today. I need something. Need water. But yeah, given that the pro workflow team inside Mac has had a lot more influence over the last couple of years, especially since Apple Silicon took over, but even before that, with the introduction of the iMac Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the return of the cheese grater Mac Pro, I do not expect that Apple would really go with less ports than before. And part of that is, I mean, this is the MacBook Pro. So even if at some point it would be like super duper similar to the MacBook Air in design, Apple would still want to have features that seem exclusive to the MacBook Pro, that warrant like a few $100s of extra payment, right? Just makes the usage a little bit more versatile, more simplistic. So in my opinion, I kind of expect most of the ports to stay the same. Maybe Apple could make a really good point to consumers. Look, we removed the SD card slot and whatever, and it allowed us to give you a fourth USB-C port on the Pro, so whatever. I don't know if that will happen, but I could see that happening. Everything else, like, of course, a redesign. I would expect the notch to change. I don't even know if I would expect it to fully go away, or it to finally get Face ID, or for it to become a dynamic island. But I would expect it to change at that point, maybe even just for change's sake, because at that point Apple could say like, look, that MacBook looks different once you open it up. It of course looks different from the side, because part of that redesign is making it thinner, and maybe even giving it a slightly different profile design. Maybe it's more curved or less curved. Maybe it just goes fully squared and starts cutting into your hand no matter the angle you touch it at. But I expect it to definitely look different from the side. But once you open it up, to be quite honest, a lot of Macs have looked very similar if they're like from one design family. And I honestly think that that was part of Apple introducing the notch, even though you could argue it could look like very much smaller, much more distinct. It could even maybe be like a simple cutout. But when Apple introduced like that MacBook Pro redesign, the notch was definitely a part of like Apple's design language. And so they thought like, oh, you know what? We're just going to give it to the Mac. We're going to house the camera here. It will allow us to make the the bezels and the sides and the top more uniform. It definitely will stick out if you see like a sketch basically of the MacBook Pro, like a super simplified version. You can even recognize it by stuff like, oh, it has a huge trackpad, but some Windows devices have started getting a huge trackpad. You see the front-facing speakers on the MacBook Pro, but that also kind of makes the MacBook Air look bad. So what would you look at? The notch. You might not love it. You might not even like it, but it's definitely recognizable, and I guess it's definitely there. So I would expect it to change. Apple could make, I would say, a somewhat disingenuous argument. Oh, we were able to redesign the notch because we went OLED. Who knows? Maybe the Mac would like introduce some kind of under display camera at that point. But yeah, that is speculation. It is unfortunately not being specified in that record here. Relight joining the chat. Guys, we've been streaming for a little over half an hour. Just a small shout out to for all of you to do the YouTube jazz here, as we call it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment live. I love interacting with everyone here directly. And of course, feel free to support this channel directly. You can leave small donations in the form of super chats and super stickers. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are all MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. Or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. So, total redesign 2026. It was kind of like an when question, not like an if. Some people said, oh, maybe some of the bigger changes would even start coming in 2025. Now, according to this Mark Gurman report, the 2025 refresh, if there is any, again, there is a chance, like my speculation is, I think that it would be really cool if the M5 chip waits until we get 2 nanometer. I think 4 nanometer is good enough for an 18-month life cycle. And then just in mid 2026, we could get the MacBook Pro with all those new features. But it seems, alas, like we are getting M5. Probably built on N5 on N3P, which will most likely be the most advanced version of a FinFET node ever made. And of course, the usage of that kind of node will allow Apple to even build some of those chips down the road in the United States. So maybe if they keep like M5 for much longer, potentially on the MacBook Air, maybe the MacBook Pro gets like a 2 nanometer chip exclusive for a whole year or something like that, simply because supply just isn't enough for like the MacBook Air. I could see Apple just being like, you know what? M5. We can double down on our 3 nanometer orders with TSMC. At some point, we will also build modems on that node. We will build like Wi-Fi and 5G modems and stuff like that. So might as well build some Mac chips on it while we're at it. It will allow us to keep to a 12-month upgrade cycle. Maybe in 2024, we give people a lot more base RAM. Maybe in 2025, with the M5 refresh, we'll give people a lot more base storage. So people will be inclined to upgrade even though we didn't change too much. So the M5, the 2025 refresh seems to be a small one. Now, that being said, of course, we don't know if the M5 refresh might be more significant because the M5 generation will be that impressive. I mean, Apple could give us like 10-15% more IPC plus 5-10% more clock speeds. They could give us an entire new graphics architecture, doubling yet again stuff like ray tracing technology. They could give us 2 times faster media encoders, 2 times faster neural engines. Not saying it will happen, but when we are talking about the smaller refresh, that does not negate the fact that there could be a lot of performance added next year. However, if you are in the market for a Mac right now and you're like, oh, maybe next year is the big redesign or something like that, or next year is that huge screen update, this is where I would say, at that point, probably just buy the M4 generation, or for a lot less money, even the M3 generation, and save up more money over time. At that point, maybe even skip the first generation of the redesign or OLED, Tandem OLED, and wait for like M7 or M8 chips. So there's so much freedom now with the MacBooks because Apple Silicon is so good. Whether you're keeping on to like an M1 or M2 chip MacBook, or even if you're getting one right now but at like a ridiculously low price, I would argue Apple Silicon really gives you a lot of headroom to wait. Of course, unless you're like a prosumer or full-on pro and you know you can leverage the latest and greatest chips, you need potentially like 1000 nits peak brightness, or you even need like the nano texture display option, or you need Thunderbolt 5 and stuff like that, then of course consider upgrading or consider waiting longer and longer. But to me, Apple Silicon, to me, when I'm waiting to upgrade my M1 Max MacBook Pro, I'm doing it from a position of privilege because it's such a good device. When I was waiting to upgrade my late 2012 iMac, which is the Mac I had before that, that largely came from the fact that I thought Intel Macs kind of started to suck a bit, and the value proposition started losing itself as Apple didn't give the Macs enough thermal headroom. People were worried about like butterfly keyboard issues and stuff like that. So while I personally liked the design of the MacBook Pros, I was not gonna buy any MacBook until like the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro, right? And because at least that one was like properly cooled. But at that point, we also kind of knew that Apple Silicon was around the corner. So I waited, and then I saw that the first generation of Apple Silicon Macs didn't have stuff that at that point I wanted, like ProMotion and more advanced display technology in general and higher performance tier chips. So I waited another year, and that is when in 2021, after 8.5 years of owning my iMac, I finally upgraded, and I upgraded in every way. Like, my MacBook Pro is superior to my old iMac in every single way, except for one, which is the raw amount of storage it holds. Because I had the 3 terabyte Fusion drive in my iMac, which of course is a lot slower than the SSD I have in my MacBook Pro, but I only have a 1 terabyte SSD inside my MacBook Pro. I don't really need much more, but that's the only kind of downgrade or side grade, however you want to call it. Just trying to tell people there is no shame in holding on to your technology for longer, maximizing your usage, maximizing your investment. That is why Apple makes great devices. Of course, they would like you to upgrade, but they also know part of why you buy it is because you like it and you expect it to keep it. This is why they can get away with like 30-40% profit margins, and how they can get away with like charging you double, triple, even quadruple the free market pricing for storage and RAM, because they know, look, if you like the base model that much, you might not like as much the upgraded pricing given the RAM and upgrade or the RAM and storage upgrade costs, but you will still like it enough to buy it, right? And that's where they make their profits. And then maybe once you upgrade in 5 years, base RAM, base storage has been improved, the pricing would still be below the free market, but it's better than what you paid all those years ago, and you would feel less cheated once you pay again an arm and a leg for extra RAM, for extra storage, a higher an unbinned processor and things like that. So yeah, in my opinion, Apple Silicon is just so good and still unmatched, given like you could argue the Snapdragon X Elite gives you like some of the battery life, but it's paired with an operating system that just sucks with it, unless every app you use is like optimized for Windows on ARM, which I promise you, unless you're like only using web apps and happy using Chrome, that's just not going to be the case. And given that one of Windows's best advantages over Mac is gaming, even if all you do is light gaming, or all you do is gaming, like let's say you only play Diablo, which in base version is pretty light, right? Like, yeah, why would you get like an ARM-based Windows laptop for that? Like, especially one with an underpowered GPU like the Snapdragon X Elite. So I know a lot of people are like really looking forward to the Snapdragon X Elite 2. And don't get me wrong, there is interesting stuff about that. I would also argue, with how little people bought the first Gen X Elite, unless Qualcomm wants to double down and make the second generation so much better that it makes people reconsider, there's also a chance that Qualcomm asks itself, oh my God, we have that huge licensing issue with ARM. Now we might be liable for potentially like hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars if we now put out a lot of desktop class chips that nobody buys, and we're left with that to eat that cost. That could hurt us as a company long term. It could cost us people who work for us. We might have to let people go. It could cost us in how much we can invest into research and development down the road. So yeah, in my opinion, I'm just not as excited, I guess, anymore for Apple's competition. But I know it will get reawakened over time. It's unfortunate. It's a side effect, in my opinion, of too much hype for the X Elite. If they kept it a little bit closer to their chest, if they had been a bit more subdued until the last moment, then I would have been more positive. But I just had to wait like 6 months, like between like the first announcement and before like the promise of actual final devices, and even then that took like another 2-3 months. So that was just egregious in my opinion, and I'm grateful that they don't seem to be repeating that with the Snapdragon X Elite 2. Like they have not announced it yet, which would have absolutely driven me insane if we had another Qualcomm chip that took like 9 months to launch. Yeah, so again, I am babbling about a little bit, but we do have more people watching. We have new people watching, so I'm trying to give you a lot of my opinions at once, trying to get your opinions back, trying to find something to discuss. And let's continue actually with the most important thing to discuss is what should we actually expect from that 2026 overhaul of the MacBook Pro. Now, importantly, we are talking about the MacBook Pro here, not the MacBook Air. That does make sense, in my opinion, given, of course, that we got the MacBook Air redesigned with the M2 version, while the MacBook Pro was redesigned with the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips. So it makes sense for the MacBook Pro to get updated first, and then the MacBook Air to follow that maybe 6 months later, maybe 12 months later, maybe even a full 18 or 24 months later, depending on like sometimes it has even sometimes something is basic to do with, well, how many engineers did Apple have to put onto that question, because sometimes their engineers will be busy with something else, so a device might take a lot longer. I would expect the Mac Mini to just keep this design that we just got this week for like the next decade or so. So who knows when we would see the redesigned MacBook Air. I would expect the MacBook Air to get an OLED screen, not a Tandem OLED screen, pretty much in that ballpark of time. Don't know if Apple would still keep like 120 hertz and variable refresh rate as exclusive for the higher end Macs. I hope they don't. I think the higher brightness of Tandem OLED, the better HDR capabilities of it, the higher efficiency of it is reason enough. And then for the rest of the stuff, they can just say, oh, MacBook Pro, the base version with the base M series chips, it still gives you better battery life than the MacBook Air. It gives you more ports. It gives you basically unlimited full performance sustained because it has active cooling. So there's still plenty of ways, in my opinion, to differentiate the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro and make the MacBook Pro very appealing without making the MacBook Air just artificially terrible. But granted, I am saying that while the MacBook Air still in 2024 is missing out stuff like even ProMotion without any kind of HDR capability or any kind of HDR capability. So it's missing every advantage of the MacBook Pro screen. YTKR, Apple will never use non-LTPO high refresh rate. True, but don't forget, LTPO by itself is not crazy at this point, especially by 2026. So Apple could have an LTPO OLED screen in the MacBook Air, and part of that, what makes me think that, is we are getting iPhone 17 and 17 Air, 17 Plus, whatever, with 120 hertz ProMotion screens next year. So if you assume that we are getting a big redesign into Tandem OLED MacBook Pro in 2026, what really speaks against the MacBook Air getting an LTPO OLED screen with like a lower peak brightness level and stuff like that, very much tuned for efficiency, not even needing like a lot of cooling in the display lid or something like that, allowing Apple to make like the actual device potentially even thinner, maybe cutting off like 5%, 5-10% of the battery capacity, saying, look, that OLED screen is so much more efficient. 2-nanometer chips, if it gets them like a year after the MacBook Pro, are so efficient. If you really want better battery life, if you want a higher brightness screen or something like that, that's what the MacBook Pro is for. But we are giving that MacBook Air a much, much nicer panel. And it would just allow them to just double and triple down on LTPO orders, probably pushing down the cost of that technology even further. Again, I cannot tell you if that's really going to happen soon, but it's not completely unreasonable. That being said, yes, of course, if it will be a simple LTPS OLED panel, then yeah, it will not get ProMotion. Apple simply doesn't like that. Yeah, but getting back to the MacBook Pro, which we actually do have rumors about. So after an M5 2025 refresh, basically a very small one, we would get a true overhaul in 2026. Part of that will come with a redesign, which we have had rumors about a thinner design. What that means for your keyboard keys or your ports or how good your speakers are, again, that remains to be seen, but it would be thinner, and I wouldn't mind a MacBook Pro that is a bit thinner, though I wouldn't want any reduction to battery capacity. Like I think it's great that the 16-inch MacBook Pro really gives you that highest possible sized battery. that is like still allowed to be taken on a plane. And the 14-inch with its 72 watt hours, I mean, it's noticeably smaller, but it still makes sense, right? If they cut it down to like 60 watt hours, I just think that would be unnecessary. YTKR, I heard that the battery supplier for Apple owns the company that makes silicon carbide batteries. You really aren't leaving that alone. Do you think Apple will adopt it? It depends. And I've said it over time and time again. Like, we have had so many rumors about Apple displays. I mean, right, what kind of stuff did we get, right? Apple display adhesive, iPhone 16, right? Now, I know that's not part of the battery itself, but it is still something that does define the iPhone's battery, and it is research and development costs. So we do have the electrically released adhesive on the iPhone 16, right? So on the iPhone 16 Pro, we do have metal chassis on the battery, or metal case or whatever, metal case battery, right? Which again, also interestingly, they didn't do that on the Pro Max, but they did it on the Pro. No idea if maybe they didn't want the weight penalty or something like that. But there's also even more stuff that still hasn't fully come true. And part of that is like iPhone, what is it? It was called like stacked battery, right? That was rumored for all the way back for like the iPhone 15 family and then the iPhone 16. It was also rumored for the Galaxies for the last 2 years at this point. So stacked batteries are better at maximizing density in the battery without dramatically changing battery chemistry. They're also better at even internally dissipating and distributing heat. So they could potentially handle like more charge cycles or higher speed charging and stuff like that. Or you could just, even in a cost optimization way, you could just think, oh, I don't need that much metal to cool the entire device because the battery adds less heat to the device now, right? So there's a lot of stuff that could happen and has been rumored, and of course some has come true. Like, yes, I understand silicon carbon batteries, they are exciting, they objectively add density. I don't know what they mean that much in regards when it comes to charging speeds and stuff like that, because we have seen already crazy charging speeds by Chinese brands even before silicon carbon. Now even some silicon carbon batteries actually see slightly slower peak charging, but of course still like twice as fast as Apple's, right? Like if they max out at 90 watts instead of 120 watts, that's still great. And even if it's not silicon carbon, there are still ways to change like the anode, like to add density and stuff like that. So which of those things will happen? Might Apple have invested so much in like a stacked silicon ion battery, lithium ion battery, the way it's currently designed to optimize the density while keeping the same chemistry? Could be. Could Apple have given up on that plan and fully invested into silicon carbon? Could be, but I couldn't tell you which one is more likely to happen at this point. Yeah, so I fully understand, of course, that it's objectively in some ways better, but then again, with Apple, you also have to consider Apple does have the weight of producing tens of millions of any model, right? I guess maybe except the Plus model, maybe that sells less than 10 million units per year or something like that. But if you look at the Pro models, especially together, right, that's a crazy amount of iPhones per year. If you're looking at the base iPhone plus what is ultimately going to be an iPhone Air or a Plus replacement, that's a crazy amount of iPhones per year, right? With the base model usually being like the best seller overall, and then the Pro and Pro Max together outselling it by a hefty amount, and then the Plus and soon Air kind of being like the forgotten stepchild there. So I really couldn't tell you. I fully understand that there are advantages here, but Apple cannot adopt certain technologies as quickly as other companies. Like even when we are talking about some like 1 inch to even higher than larger than 1 inch sized sensors, right? Maybe the lens panels that would be needed to fully optimize for such a large sensor in a small form factor are so supply limited that Apple cannot put it into an iPhone Pro. Even the Pro Max or something like that, right? So, and I'm not saying that as an excuse, I'm just saying it as an explanation, which I know some people will like to mix up sometimes. But in my opinion, we never know when is Apple maybe sometimes lazy or stubborn in not implementing a certain technology. When are they maybe waiting for something even better or something like that? And when would they just love to have that technology, but they just don't like. Not every company is TSMC and has, for one, the great relationship with Apple to give Apple that first batch. Might be so supply limited that while TSMC's is usually enough for at least the Pro iPhones, this year it has been enough for all iPhones, and even beyond that, N3E has been really, really in good supply. But maybe it would just be enough for like a Vivo X200 Pro, right? Who knows? And I'm just trying to keep expectations low, not because I know that Apple will sometimes go cheaper than necessary, but I will also sometimes defend Apple and saying we don't know why they don't embrace certain technologies sometimes. So, thinner design. We have talked about Apple's transition to OLED, specifically about Tandem OLED. And the last part of the rumor is that the M6 chip that will likely be powering it is most likely being built on 2 nanometer. That, of course, implies that M5 would still be an N3 chip, or in that case, more specifically, an N3P or N3X chip. That would unfortunately result in me losing my bet with the community for next year, where I've said that I believe that it's likely that Apple would have at least one 2 nanometer chip next year. I've had put hope that maybe it would be both the A19 Pro and the M5, maybe even not the M5 and the actual M5 launches as a 2 nanometer chip in 2026. But every rumor right now points to all A19 chips to be built on N3P, while all M5 chips, well, supposedly they will actually start hitting in 2025 and also be built on N3P, making us wait until 2 nanometer. Who knows? 2 nanometer might be a little bit like N3E. And don't forget, the M4 technically came out way, way earlier than most expected. Basically just half a year after the M3, but it didn't come out in Max, right? After 6 months, it first came to the iPad Pro. So maybe Apple could release a 2 nanometer chip at this point in the middle of 2026, and then release it across like the iPhone in 2026, and then that same M5 chip and its larger M4 Pro, M4 Max variants, M6 Pro, M6 Max variants would roll out throughout 2026. Then the M6 Ultra would come out in 2027. So again, we are now looking 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years into the future. But yeah, it seems like that bet is something that I will lose. YTK, are tons of phones now using it? No, they're not. That is what I'm trying to tell you. Like, tons of phones, when you say that, you mean individual models. I highly encourage you, look how many of those phones these companies actually sell. I know we look, for example, at the Xiaomi 15 Pro or even the Ultra, or we look at the Vivo X2 100, 200 Pro, right? But those are like a drop in the bucket of overall sales for those companies. Those are their flagships. Those are the things they advertise. Those are the things that help them create mind share for the company overall. But when it comes to what they actually sell, most of their sales are in the sub $400, sub $300 price category. So even, and by the way, if those companies happen to have a better relationship with the silicon carbon battery, maybe they just got that earlier than Apple, right? So again, I'm not saying that Apple shouldn't implement it or that they couldn't implement it, but I'm pointing you towards the reality that nobody produces even close to the amount of Pro Max chips and stuff like Pro Max devices that Apple does. Yeah, so again, this is not saying Apple shouldn't implement newer technology. And of course, we do know that Apple does like sometimes implementing the newest technology with like the newest nodes with potentially like 2 nanometer, which is going to be the case. But we also know that Apple is still beholden to what can those companies actually produce. I'm pretty certain if TSMC made 2 nanometer available in some way, shape, or form in late 2025 for at least one chip, I'm pretty sure that Apple would put heaven and earth into motion to make sure that they launch an M5 chip on 2 nanometer at that time to have that advantage, to prolong the life cycle at which they can produce the M5 chip, keep it more relevant for longer periods of time, have a bigger advantage, be more competitive potentially if Intel's 18A node turns out to be really, really good at the end of next year, right? And I'm pretty sure if silicon carbon was like such a huge change and Apple couldn't see themselves being competitive without it, they would do similar things. And if it was available in the supply numbers that Apple needed. It's already in its 3rd gen next year, 4th year. Yeah, but have you noticed how the actual density increase for like the first generation of silicon carbon was like barely there? Right? It's this year, it's this generation of silicon carbon where people are talking about it because we are finally getting that large density increase. That's what I'm talking about. I understand that some version of it has existed in the past. I guess you could talk about it similarly to how Samsung had like their first 108 megapixel sensor and then their 200 megapixel sensor. But that solution was like basically crap. It struggled with edge-to-edge sharpness. The chip wasn't capable of like even working with so many pixels. So the downbinning was crazy. The loss of detail from what could potentially be possible was absolutely not worth it. And yes, YTKR, you are making a good point actually, and that is we do not know, for example, what specific technologies Apple is targeting for the iPhone Air, for a thinner MacBook Pro, right? But I would also argue, like, look at, for example, the iPad Pro, the M4 version, right? With Apple's superior efficiency and by targeting a display that is super thin and super efficient like Tandem OLED, they were able to give you more battery life than the M2 iPad Pro while making it thinner, while making it lighter. And on the larger version, they did so while reducing the battery capacity. And on the 11-inch version, they actually managed to increase battery capacity. So while yes, if they go silicon carbon down the road, it would be even crazier. Maybe Apple goes entirely insane and builds like a 4mm thick iPad. But yeah, Apple still isn't struggling to give us more advanced products. And then on the iPhone, don't forget, we don't know how thin the iPhone Air is going to be, because there is still the question, how big would Apple accept a camera protrusion to be at some point, right? Because there's only so thin you can make a camera without starting to make it worse. Yeah, so again, not trying to downplay, but there is a lot. Maybe Apple is hoarding right now silicon carbon batteries for the iPhone Air and saying like, look, that will be our trial run where we are adding like everything we have. We are adding silicon carbon batteries, we're adding metal casing batteries for better heat dissipation, we're adding electrically regulated adhesives to the iPhone Air, and we are adding stacked and silicon carbon. Who knows? Yeah, but of course, this brings us to another rumor, and we did briefly cover that. We've already covered that also in the past several times. This does come from South Korea's ET News. It does line up with what Jeff Poo has said and what Min-Chi Kuo has said and what Ross Young has said even years ago. And that is that the entire iPhone 17 lineup will be getting LTPO. It will be getting 120 Hz support and variable refresh rate support. So that's the full ProMotion stuff. Some people always try to say, oh, what prevents Apple from giving us 120 Hz ProMotion on that and that display? And I'm like, look, Apple doesn't like giving you like 120 Hz without variable refresh rate. In fact, we have never gotten a ProMotion screen that is just high refresh rate. It has always been high refresh and variable refresh rate. And of course, one of those devices is rumored to be the iPhone 17 Air. And with that iPhone 17 Air, we are looking at things like a single camera design, God knows what solution, for example, for the battery to still keep it long lasting. God knows how well they can manage to cool it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming together. We've heard that it would have a 6.6-inch display. So yeah, both Samsung and LG will be supplying the LTPO panels for those iPhone 17 models. So there's a lot to consider here. Also, when we're talking about ProMotion, sometimes we're talking 10 to 120 Hertz variable refresh rate, 1 to 120 Hertz variable refresh rate. There is a chance Apple could use an older LTPO panel for the Airs, for the base 17 and Air models, and then use the highest quality LTPO panels for the Pro models, but that's also not getting specified here. Of course, a shout out here again to Ross Young, who has put all of those rumors forward years ago at this point. And yes, if you are somebody who really, really dislikes the fact that the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus still have 60 Hertz display, next year is finally going to be your year. Yeah, believe me, bro, I can't imagine Apple efficient chips with 6,000 milliampere hour batteries. Yes, but I can also imagine Apple then hiking up the prices more for that, or struggling with supplying enough devices for months potentially. So while I do fully understand, and I as an enthusiast would easily pay the money, I as an enthusiast would easily deal with that like early teething issues, like potentially like really low supply by Apple standards, right? You have to understand Apple has a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. If a technology is newer and better, but it also adds an unreasonable amount of cost that would have to be recouped by increasing pricing in a way that maybe the community is not ready to pay for, no matter how much better that battery actually is, Apple would have to make that hard decision to either not adopt the technology or, for example, adopt it later. And I mean, we have seen Apple adopt technology later. How long did it take Apple to implement OLED? It literally took them, if you consider the original iPhone, it took them 10 years. And if you consider Samsung's, like, let's say, first decent OLEDs, let's say the Galaxy S4 S4, now let's say the Galaxy S5 in 2011, right? That's still over half a decade more time before Apple finally got with OLED. And you mentioned that like silicon carbon batteries are technically inside their third or fourth generation. Well, by Apple standards, it's not too uncommon to adopt something half a decade later. But also, for example, what I mentioned, that if silicon carbon has hit its promised density only this year, which allowed companies to go from 5,400 milliampere hour batteries to 6,000, while actually making the display, while making the device a little bit thinner. Who knows that Apple didn't wait for that technology, and now that technology is in enough supply to supply one single iPhone model, and that could be the iPhone 17 Air. And then after that, the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max could then benefit from like the combination of a 2 nanometer chip with a silicon carbon battery, right? But at that point, I would like to talk about that kind of stuff once we actually have rumors about that stuff, because at that point, I could talk about everything under the sun, right? I could talk about micro LED, because yes, technically micro LED exists with like Samsung's The Wall. It's definitely not in enough supply for Apple, but it exists. Could I talk about 1-inch sensors or even beyond that? I could. Could I talk about crazy 10x optical zoom arrays and stuff like that? I could, and I probably will, because of some rumors that we got a couple of months ago. But yeah, I'm just trying to say, I'm still trying to like actually like differentiate between like actual rumors and leaks to like purely speculation that we as a community might have. For example, that brings up to one of the last pieces of news that I actually wanted to cover today, and that is that the second generation Vision Pro has been subject to what I consider a lot of speculation by leakers and rumors, right? Because a lot of leakers and rumors have talked about what I dubbed basically the Apple Vision Air, right? A cheaper version, which with potentially worse screens, with a lot of more dependence on your iPhone and stuff like that. So not the highest end chips inside it or something like that. But now we have rumors, and you basically know that those are not actually rumors about something changing inside Apple, but it's actually rumors about these leakers finally maybe understanding Apple's plans, right? So meanwhile, Apple has delayed production of a cheaper version of the Vision Pro until beyond 2027 for a while now. So why? So apparently you are not as great of a leaker if you are learning about something that has happened for a while only now. But there's also the question, maybe that was always the plan, and maybe some optimistic stuff inside Apple was like, oh, maybe we can launch it in 2020, late 2025, right? But maybe late 2026 is likelier and early 2027 is more possible, right? And we're talking about production. So if they start producing it in 2027, if it maybe hits any kind of production issues, we could be looking at like a late 2027 launch to sometime 2028, right? So there is a lot of like careful selection that one has to do with rumors and leaks, and especially just with stuff that you actually believe. Now, one stuff that I do believe is that we will be getting a second generation Apple Vision Pro. I would expect for Apple Vision Pro 1 to get some Apple Intelligence features in Vision OS 3 at next year's WWDC, but I don't expect that version to get the full slate of Apple Intelligence. Especially visual intelligence. I don't know, like running all those high resolution cameras and stuff like that while also simultaneously analyzing all that. In my opinion, it could be too much for the M2 chip. Even though it's capable of running Apple Intelligence, even though it has 16 gigs of RAM, even though the actual camera input is handled by the R1 chip, but I do believe that it just makes sense to keep some of that stuff exclusive to the M5. Not everything. You don't want to make the original Apple Vision Pro owners too angry. But in my opinion, there is a solid reason to differentiate between like Apple Vision 1, Apple Vision 2. And so let's look actually at what we are rumored to get here. It's not too much, and it does line up with other stuff actually that we heard about the stopgap. If you want to call it stopgap, I don't like that term. But if we're talking about the stopgap, like Apple MacBook Pro with M5 in 2025. Supposedly, we're also getting an M5 Apple Vision Pro in 2025. Again, this is coming from Min-Chi Kuo, who has not had the greatest track record after becoming like an independent leaker, but he is still somewhat reliable. So Apple definitely plans a bigger upgrade here. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that was like introduced during WWDC 2025. But if you were expecting to potentially get something way cheaper than $34.99, I wouldn't bet on it. With M5, I would expect it to give you more base storage, more base memory, maybe 24, maybe even full 32 gigs of memory. But I would expect it to still stay close to this pricing. Maybe with how much cheaper micro OLED has been getting, maybe Apple could push it down to $29.99. Especially if they keep like the amount of memory the same or something like that. But for now, they're still like rolling out Apple Vision Pro in other regions of the world, like Saudi Arabia. So Tim Cook himself has talked about it in an interview, saying it's an early adopter product for people who want tomorrow's technology today. If you want to count the M2 as tomorrow's technology, now that M4 is out, he basically understands that at the current pricing, it is not a mass market technology. At the very least, we can use a chip upgrade. I hope, of course, there are other quality of life changes, like a wider field of view, potentially, and this is for you, YTKR, maybe a battery with like a brand new technology. So it could be either lighter weight or at the same size and weight, give you a longer charge. So otherwise, I would say Vision Pro itself is great. I mean, it can use upgrades across the board. Like it should not be a Wi-Fi 6 device. It should at the very least be a Wi-Fi 6E device. In 2025, I expect it to come out as a Wi-Fi 7 device, hopefully with a modem that is actually like decently high speed, unless that consumes too much energy. Then I could see Apple giving it basically the same Wi-Fi modem that they have given the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro. So there's so much to consider and actually so little to upgrade, because this is probably, well, it's most likely Apple's most mature first generation product ever. But given that a lot of people these days are just like, oh, I want AR glasses and nothing else, no virtual reality headsets for me or anything like that, maybe Apple would have perpetually trouble selling it regardless of how low they can price it. Maybe even at $1,500, it just isn't, or even at just around $1,000, it could never mimic even a fraction of the iPhone success, because the form factor is simply not what people want. And maybe Apple either just stops development on like a super portable thing like that, or wearable even, or they pivot entirely internally to like developing AR glasses. So there is so much that can happen and will happen even soon, right? We are basically getting across-the-board confirmation of M5 chips for next year, which I guess shouldn't be that surprising. We're getting confirmation basically that the base iPhone models will be better next year. You can argue about the iPhone Air having questionable decisions, like having only a single camera. But I've also heard from people in my community that they themselves don't need more than one camera. And as long as it's still a very good main 48 megapixel camera, they're happy with that. So yeah, it's uh, again, it's I believe time will tell. Who knows? Maybe last minute Apple just designs to produce iPhone 17 Air with like two cameras for all I care. Do you see a big difference in the contrast and dark images between your iPhone and Mac? You mean between like my OLED iPhone and my mini LED Mac? No. I see blooming sometimes on my Mac, for example, when I run YouTube, like that bottom panel, right, where I control like at what part of the video I am, where you scrub through the video, that one definitely blooms. But the Mac, I would argue, because it's also 14 inches, while technically the peak brightness of HDR is the same at 1600 nits, it's a much more immersive 1600 nits than what my iPhone offers because it's a larger screen. And it's definitely more exciting as like a bright point than anything that my OLED TV can do, which is, of course, much more limited than even the iPhone in that regard. So for most people, while yes, Tandem OLED will be superior, and everything that I've seen from M4 Pro, iPad Pros is even more impressive than what I ever got on my MacBook Pro. Given that my MacBook Pro has served me well for 3 years and most likely will serve me at least for another 2 years, maybe even three, before I even consider upgrading. I could keep it for considerable, maybe even like 7 years, if Apple doesn't potentially like ever gives me like a cheaper way to get like 2 terabytes of storage or something like that. I could be like, you know what? I would much rather upgrade maybe my iPad Pro. Um, at least I read on it. It's basically always in my hand to a degree, right? As long as my Mac is enough for streaming and stuff like that, I could be happy. So to get back to that redesign, like no redesign will make me upgrade. Like I'm not bothered by the notch. Like I guess even thinner bezels on the MacBook Pro would be basically like laughable at this point. I mean, don't forget, part of why the MacBook Pro has bezels at all is that there is also partially that plastic cover that prevents it from scratching when you close the display lid, right? So there is a limit to how thin they can even make those bezels. Um, yeah, beyond that, I love the keyboard, I love the speakers, I love the trackpad. I think the trackpad could have a faster input rate, but that will not make me upgrade. I think Apple could go crazy with Tandem OLED, maybe give us like 180 or 240 hertz refresh rate, especially if they give the MacBook Air like a proper LTPO ProMotion OLED screen. Then that would be a way they could differentiate those products. But at that point, we are probably so far ahead in the future that I just don't like. At that point, I would probably be upgrading just for the sake of upgrading, just because I'm interested. But there is no need. Like when I look at my mini LED screen on my MacBook Pro, it never looks bad to me. Similar on my iPhone, my OLED screen never looks bad to me. Like I don't need that screen to be necessarily pushed to 3000 nits of brightness or like even higher brightness of for like HDR, like beyond 1600 nits. And I guess like mini LED, for example, could be like a really huge game changer. And I mean, when you think about, for example, we talked a lot about like making displays, making batteries larger or at least higher density, right? There is stuff still that can give Apple a lot of efficiency, right? They can switch to their own modems and really optimize them for efficiency. They can even start baking that modem into the main die of like the like what would be at that point basically like the 820, 821 chips. And at that point, they would have a modem that is technically like built on 2 nanometer or A16, which would of course be like crazy efficient. Apple, of course, can use like uh, also with the battery they can even give it like basically like a different physical arrangement inside with stacked stuff to increase capacity even without expensively changing the chemistry. So there's so much, and of course my favorite piece of hardware that should come along any day now, micro LED. And even what we've seen from micro OLED, which is granted overkill because it is a technology designed for maximum pixel density, but they could start even printing that pixel basically on the substrate of the panel, so making it basically one level or making it one structure, reducing the amount of like where how they route electricity to the actual pixels and stuff like that. So there is so much that can still happen. While we are in the era of diminishing returns for hardware, I'm still excited overall. There's so much, and while yes, there is of course the MacBook Pro here. I would say, and that is even something I put in my title, right? Which, what does that mean for the M4? I would still say if you need a Mac now, I would still recommend you get an M4 and even an M3 Mac on a discount. However, if next year you feel that need, maybe at that point you should consider waiting, especially since I believe that those rumors will be much more crystallized. And at that point, while for now we just got a huge performance increase, even huge efficiency increase with N3P, N3E, with N3B, N3E, N3P is not going to do that. It's going to be like a 5% change. Maybe the architecture will be much newer, but we don't know about that yet. However, the year after, 2 nanometers is a pretty big deal. Plus Tandem OLED, all of those things together, really, really promising. Who knows, next year Apple could just give you faster chip, faster Wi-Fi, like full Wi-Fi 7, and potentially something like giving the MacBook Air 512 gigabytes of storage, or even something creative like 384, or the MacBook Pro gets like 1 terabyte based storage, or again something in between like 768. Apple could give you like double the storage speeds, like going from 3.5 gigabits per second to 7 on the MacBook Air, and from 7.5 to like 10 to a full 15 on the MacBook Pro. So there's so much that will be happening. I would like to talk more about this redesign, this OLED panel, everything else about it, once we have more confirmation, more leaks and rumors, and once we're closer to it. And for now, I definitely do not recommend you fully like ignore the M4 MacBooks and saying like, oh, you know what, I will wait until 2026. Only do that if you're actually really happy with what you already have. I myself am really happy with what I already have. I never even considered the M4 family in that regard, because no upgrade would be meaningful to me, because every task I do on my MacBook is currently perfectly met by my battery, by my screen, by my processor. However, if my use cases change, then I would actually consider upgrading. And that's the line of thought I recommend you have. I want micro LED or Apple using OLED with full DC dimming. PWM is burning my eyes. I don't know what their PWM refresh rate is at this point. I know some Android manufacturers have started switching to like 38, 40 hertz or something crazy like that. I don't know. I believe Apple's PWM is like at 480 hertz or something like that. I can actually look that up. Apple PWM refresh. Severe eye strain, iPhone 16 PWM. Was there actually an increase? Headaches. 480 hertz is only on the 16 line. I actually didn't know that it was updated on the 16. No, the 15 Pro Max had 480 hertz, didn't it? I thought that was the first iPhone to go for 80 hertz. Regardless, I never had issues with PWM, even in the era where it had 240 refreshes. It's unfortunate for you, but yeah, for that reason and for more, I actually don't know. By the way, would micro LED still not need iPhone 14 Plus Pro Max were 60 and 240 hertz respectively. Okay. So it was the 15 series that got 480 hertz. Okay. I guess if I can trust this forum post. Let me switch back to something darker. Where's something darker? There it is. Yeah, so I don't actually know how micro LED would work, how it modulates its brightness. Like, I don't know if it would use PWM. Like, micro LED, PWM. Micro LED may not be the answer. Apple has canceled the development of micro LED, a new PWM operational scheme for micro LED using it. Yeah, I think that micro LED would still be PWM bound. But at that point, Apple could go crazy and give you like even a faster refresh. You're saying micro LED is using DC dim like LCD, but it is pixel level brightness control. I'm looking at 3 to see if mine would address flicker. Flicker PWM free displays are not rare and can be easily acquired, yeah, but not for OLED. I think we're generally on the same page. Learning doesn't seem to be my mortal enemy. Has it gotten better for you, YT, on the iPhone 15 or 16 series? Is that enough to overcome like your headaches? I really don't see PWM at all. I didn't even see it back in the like 240 refresh rate era. Okay, but if micro LED does work a lot more like LED, in general, I guess that could make sense, and I guess that would be a huge reason to upgrade. I mean, if you are getting headaches from your tech, that's basically the best reason to upgrade ever. Which I understand, like most of us probably wouldn't be able to live like a regular techie life without having that tech. But if you get headaches, it probably would be like your first reason, like your best reason ever to just throw a lot of money at that problem and say like, give me the hardware that doesn't give me headaches. Xiaomi and Motorola uses LTP OLED with full DC dim. I'm using iPhone 13. Okay, don't actually know. Might be like that this is BOE technology or something like that. It's definitely not something that LG and Samsung are supplying for now in mass. So I couldn't tell you, to be honest, because I was never bothered by PWM on OLED. I never did a lot of research into it, but hey, maybe that's a reason to actually change that. So yeah, but for now, guys, I am wrapping it up. Last shout out to do all the YouTube jazz here while I briefly summarize. Like the video, share it out to anybody who think might enjoy it. Comment, please, afterwards. That helps with the algorithm. Don't just comment in the live stream. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Consider becoming a channel member right here on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. Whenever you catch me live, you can leave a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. Any support, directly or indirectly, goes a long way. You guys see, I love interacting with a lively live chat. You guys also see, of course, that a lot of the hype of the M4 announcements has died down, but we'll be looking into more stuff down the road as the reviews come out, unboxings come out, and of course a lot of benchmarks come out. But for now, thank you so much for joining today. There will probably not be timestamps on this video because a lot of the topics have been thrown in and out because of how I reacted to the chat. I'll try to keep my future videos a little bit more organized, and then we'll be back to giving you timestamps. But of course, the more livelier the chat is, the less likely it is that it's that easy to divide into even topics. Thank you guys so much. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.